Let's get another view now on the situation in Gauteng today. The decision by the Gauteng Premier David Makhura to remove Dr Bandile Masuku from his position as MEC for Health based on a preliminary report by the Special Investigating Unit which finds he is responsible and oversaw the PPE procurement scandal in that province. Then there's another forensic report compiled by the investigator Paul O'Sullivan, paid for by Masuku, which appears to clear the now former health MEC. At the same time, you'll have seen that statement published in just the last half hour here on Newsbeat from Masuku, in which he says he will challenge the SIU's report as it stands at the moment. In other words, he says he's done nothing wrong. Ongama Mtimka is a political analyst at Nelson Mandela University in Nelson Mandela Bay this afternoon. Ongama, good afternoon to you. This is quite an action to take, to fire an MEC in this way by the Gauteng Premier.
Sure. So it is a good step. South Africa, or the ANC throughout the country, is under pressure to demonstrate that it agrees indeed and has got affirming actions which prove its commitment to, dealing with corruption and everything that goes with it, especially around COVID-19 procurement. So I doubt that. I think that the pressure for Makhura would have been internally driven, but also even from elsewhere within the organization as the party battles to show the public that it is actually committed and serious about dealing with corruption, especially COVID-19 related.
I mean, there's also a particular situation in Gauteng. The ANC just clinging to power in last year's elections, local government elections next year. The ANC in Gauteng in particular has to show the electorate it won't stand for corruption.
Sure. So the space that politicians have to, to take decisions which may be perceived to be contrary to what the popular will is narrows every time a party loses a margin in terms of how the gap between it and opposition parties. So what we are seeing in Gauteng, at least the slight commitment to do right, shows that over time the pressure or electoral performance as well as public pressure is having a good impact on state executive conduct. And I think that that's what this shows. They know that should they bungle things, in the next election, they are likely going to lose it. In fact, in the last election, they just edged it, as you put it. So it's a situation where regime performance and the use of executive authority, gets to be focused on a lot as a political party loses, or as the margin between a governing party and opposition parties narrows.
At the same time, for Makhura himself, and if you look at the ANC in Gauteng, I mean, they've had long debates around whether Masuku should vacate his position. It went on for quite a long time. They couldn't come to a decision in the end. It seems Makhura is now being forced to act. I mean, this tells you how difficult the internal politics of the ANC can be sometimes around these issues. Masuku, I would suggest, is possibly quite important to Makhura, and this has happened before in the ANC.
Absolutely. So in the ANC, alliances are very important, and it's important not to upset them because one's stay in office is largely dependent on the alliances they maintain, but also for Makhura, who may be assumed to be, heading for an exit, it's important who gets to be your successor. So I don't think this is a decision that was taken lightly, but what it does, Stephen, for me, is that we're beginning to see that the scales between the autonomy of the ANC to take policy decisions or exercise executive authority as it pleases, on the one hand, and then on the other, pleasing the public and doing what is closely associated with good governance. There has been a shifting of scales towards the latter. And I think that bodes well for South African democracy. But obviously, some of these actions are actions which weaken a politician, as it can be assumed to be the case even in this instance with David Makhura. Some of the questions that get asked, by the way, Stephen, here is that the Integrity Commission of the ANC arrived at similar findings with these apparent findings of the SIU, in the sense that while they were acknowledging that Masuku may not have done any wrongdoing, what they, were pointing to was that he could have managed things better. Obviously, we know that even at a party political level, he expressed his displeasure with that report and his intentions to challenge it. And in fact, a submission that challenges that report, which is why the party political process was halted. So what's interesting for me in these dynamics is how the use of executive authority is changing in line with not just the internal dynamics of the party, which used to be the sole focus of ANC politicians, but also as an attempt to appease an assumed public preference.
That's a very important tipping point in a way that you allude to. I'm going to use a technical term that I think we're going to use more and more in our politics, Ongama, that this has become a hot mess, right? I mean, you have in the middle of this the ANC in Gauteng having to take action against Bandile Masuku and discharging him. The presidential spokesperson, Kusile Diko, is stuck in the middle of it. You have Masuku's wife, Loyiso Masuku, who is a member of the Mayoral Committee in Johannesburg. I mean, it just gets more and more complicated.
It does, and I think one of the things that they will be sensitive to is what precedent is set by this. And also, a very interesting question that's coming up, Stephen, is if you link up bungling in a department all the way to a level of the senior leadership in the department, to what extent can that same argument be leveled against the premier or at a national level, the president? So if the principle to get Masuku to be held accountable here is that he could have exercised better oversight, the question is, how far do you stretch that principle, or to up to what level of seniority in the party or in provincial government or whatever sphere of government is applicable, do you apply the principle? Because I suppose whenever action is taken, it's not just the specificities of the case that matter. Also, is what are the underlying principles that result in the action. And this is not going to be over, Stephen, because remember the ANC is trapped currently in a process of coming up with direction for its and for all its regional structures, in saying if one is accused of corruption, they must step aside. Now, that question of up to what levels of leadership do you bring in when there's been cases of maladministration is going to be an important one. For example, a case in hand is the issue of the use of government, a state flight to go to Zimbabwe. If you can take this principle at a provincial level, to what extent must you take it also when it comes to holding the president accountable for that trip to Zimbabwe? Do you end it at the level of the minister responsible, or do you ask questions such as you should have known better even at the level of the highest level of leadership? So it's not going to be what the ANC, because it's busy making and remaking institutions, it's going to open itself up to internal challenges, but also challenges to be consistent outside its own processes.
Sure, Ongama. I mean, all sorts of politics comes into play when you mention that. Such an interesting point. I do want to ask about the other development today, I hope you don't mind, around the former President Jacob Zuma and the Zondo Commission. The Zondo Commission now issuing a summons for him. There was the argument. Zuma's lawyers confirming to Newsroom Africa today that they'll now go to court. They'll try and demand that the Deputy Chief Justice, Raymond Zondo, the chair of the Zondo Commission, recuse himself. I mean, this is about the law technically, but you and I both know it's about politics and how this looks, right?
So people who are pro-President Zuma suggest that when we communicate positions which are informed by his conduct built over a long period of time, we are being unfair and biased. But here, it's a classic case of somebody who wants to find every trick in the book to avoid being accountable. I note, Stephen, his comments before the abrupt end of his presentation before the commission, where he lamented, I am being cross-examined here, thoroughly so, as if to say he is above the commission itself and should not be asked the kinds of questions that are being asked from him. So everything else that follows since then, in my view, forms part of a strategy to attempt to evade answering questions on state capture, ranging from his choice to say he chooses to recognize that, notwithstanding the evidence that pointed to his name, he chooses to say he's not directly implicated, so he's not going to come. Then he gets invited as a matter of courtesy. He comes and he questions the very same basis upon which he was, called in. That was important because their agenda has been throughout the period of this commission has been to show how the commission has no business whatsoever in attempting to get some answers from the president. So this tactic now of going to the courts to raise a matter which he should have been sensitive to even the first time he went to appear before the commission is, for me, at least appearing to be a lot more about delaying his appearance in that commission more than or spending as much time to discuss technicalities and not have a day when he gets to answer the specific merits of allegations that he faces.
Ongama Mtimka, really appreciate the time. Thank you. Political Analyst Lecturer at Nelson Mandela University in Nelson Mandela Bay. Well, fascinating insights coming from him. We'll continue these conversations around Bandile Masuku, but other news as well in the last few hours around the United States politics. And gosh, it's all happening there. We'll talk about that too. Stay with us here on Newsfeeds.